Hello, everyone. My name is Mike Crosbie. Thank you very much for joining us this evening in our webinar series, Inclusion in Sacred Space. I am an architecture professor at the University of Hartford in West Hartford, Connecticut, and also a board member of Sharing Sacred Spaces. I'm very, very glad that you're with us this evening. This is the second webinar in the series, and it presents 4 viewpoints by designers of sacred space who strive for inclusion and through that diversity in sacred space. Now, sacred space has historically been what some people refer to as contested space. Access to it has been denied by such factors as gender or race or sexual preference, social standing, religious belief, physical ability, and also marital status. So this webinar series explores how designers of sacred space can challenge exclusivity and promote inclusion, which ultimately enhances diversity in sacred space and beyond the walls of the congregation's home. A sacred space is considered as one that has the potential to affirm social justice, inclusion, and diversity, particularly as they are manifest in religious spaces of the 3 Abrahamic faiths. So with us tonight, we have Father Dick Vosko. And I want to introduce him, tell you a little bit about him, and then we will get started with his presentation. So Richard S. Vosko, PhD, honorary AIA, is an award-winning liturgical designer and consultant whose work is well known internationally. He speaks and writes frequently on topics pertaining to religion and the environment for worship. Father Vosko is a Catholic priest and believes that houses of worship ought to be inclusive places that celebrate diversity, equity, and foster a sense of belonging. The title of his latest book is Art and Architecture for Congregational Worship, The Search for Common Ground. And thank you very much for being here tonight for Father Vosko. And please get going with your presentation, and we're all very eager to hear what you have to say.
Thank you very much, Mike. It's a pleasure for me to be here. Thank you very much for inviting me. And I also thank Vanessa Avery for doing the good work that she is doing in the program Sharing Sacred Spaces. Sacred spaces, as you know, are few and far between in terms of the multiplicity of them these days. All of the studies seem to suggest that there's such a shift in religious behavior in the United States, causing many, many congregations to merge with other congregations, even congregations from different denominations or faith traditions, while others still have to shut down. I think this particular shift in religious behavior or worship behavior is prompting a whole new purpose, new in this age, but not new in terms of the history of religion. And I think this new purpose is further energizing congregations to take care of the poor and the needy and those who are excluded, those who are vulnerable in our neighborhoods. What I'd like to do tonight, Mike, is to examine a couple of different concepts, or maybe they're realities now. One has to do with the built environment for worship and how we can modify those spaces to further express the purpose or the mission, the message of a particular congregation. The second part of it has to do with a popular term these days called integral ecology. And I'm going to begin by sharing my screen here with some of these ideas. Our planet is a fragile planet. And so it's very, very difficult for people to understand what our collective responsibilities are for this particular planet. The current Bishop of Rome, Pope Francis, in his recent letters, suggests to us that integral ecology is a term we should become familiar with. What he's talking about here is that it's one thing to care for the environment, but the important thing here is to notice the connections between environmental, political, social, and justice issues. That it's one thing to care for the planet, but what he's really stressing, it seems to me, is that we have to take care of one another. And I think this is this notion of integral ecology that helps us understand that we are all connected, not only with one another, but also with the cosmic enterprise that we dwell in. This is not a new idea. Leonardo da Vinci, back in the 15th and 16th century, he was a polymath. And what he talked about then, and because he was so talented and did so many wonderful things, he said we must study the science of art and study the art of science, learn how to see and realize that everything connects to everything else. And what he was talking about is not just all the things that he was involved in, but he was talking about the connection of philosophy, science, technology, engineering, and I would even add here probably theology as well. So another part of this presentation tonight is something that we often quote Winston Churchill as saying after World War II, when they were rebuilding the House of Commons. He said, "We shape our buildings, thereafter they shape us." And this is my fundamental premise here, that the houses of worship that we create, I believe that the manner in which we create them and the way in which we design the interiors and arrange ourselves for worship, regardless of whatever faith tradition we practice, that particular worship setting is going to shape our behavior, not only at worship, but also in the public square. So where we pray, I believe, shapes our prayer. So the house of worship that we design or inherit, that's going to shape the way in which we pray. And there are a variety of worship practices, of course. Many cases, worship is delivered to the congregation by the clergy, whatever the faith tradition is. What I'm proposing is that we reduce all those barriers. We take down those boundaries between clergy and laity so that we can see that the entire congregation is interconnected, not only with one another as members of a particular congregation, but also those people who live in the shadows of their houses of worship. So I believe that the way in which we worship then will energize that congregation for practicing service in the larger community. What this means is, and it's something you've already alluded to, Michael, is that this means that the congregations, and this is a very difficult thing today because we know there's such polarization in our cultures here in the United States, especially and perhaps in many, many other countries. It means working for diversity, equity, and inclusion in our faith communities. If we can't do this within our own houses of worship, within our own congregations, it's going to be very difficult to practice diversity, equity, and inclusion in our larger neighborhoods. This also involves a sense of belonging, that diversity, equity, and inclusion are really wonderful concepts, but do they end up in helping an individual have this feeling that I belong here, that I have a right to be here, that I'm respected here, that regardless of my gender, regardless of my sex, regardless of my religious behavior, regardless of anything else, will this congregation accept me and help me appreciate that I belong here? So that's what I'm really trying to figure out here. And trying to help people design their worship spaces to create this sense of connectivity, not only during worship, but then, therefore, also out in the public square. I have three examples. The first one is St. Vincent de Paul Church in Albany, New York. Now, this particular congregation has for a long, long time has had one of the largest food pantries in the greater capital district of New York State. And so they're very, very involved in feeding those who come to their parish center. This food pantry is a little different than most others, that people can actually come in here with shopping carts and they can take whatever food they need depending upon the size of their families. And that's an important thing. Give them this dignity of being able to shop for themselves. This particular congregation is also an advocate of LGBTQIA plus rights. And so this congregation is out there publicly. And it's a very controversial thing in some religions to take this public stance. I know that. But this particular congregation does. And so they're very, very involved. When we take a look at their worship space, however, we see that it's what I would like to call a sociofugal pattern of seating, where the congregants are more like spectators rather than activists during the act of worship. And if you look at the sanctuary up at the platform there, called a chancel area in some religions, or a bema in the Jewish traditions, worship is led and delivered from that particular platform by the clergy. The congregants here felt this is not a good expression of their social justice work in the public square, and so they turned the church around. And this particular renovation then places the liturgical action in the center of the congregation so that everybody is gathered around. There is no hierarchy as such, even though there are prayer leaders, but everybody is in this circle, looking at one another, praying with one another, advocating for one another. And this is an example, I believe, then, about how the worship environment can put us in touch, can help us connect with one another. And in this congregation, everything is completely barrier-free. Not only do LGBTQIA members of the community feel welcome in this place and take an active role in the ministries, those who want to join this ministry, depending upon their own physical abilities, are baptized, initiated into this particular congregation. And that's the baptismal font that is in the floor. So water is poured over the individual who perhaps has to sit in a wheelchair. The entire space is barrier-free by the addition of a very gentle ramp that leads up to the platform, making it possible for different individuals to assume different roles during the worship practice. Another example, the Religious of the Sacred Heart of Mary is a Catholic congregation of sisters, and they are located in Tarrytown, New York. This particular congregation is not only dwelling on their own needs and expectations as they get older, especially. But in 2006, this particular congregation became affiliated with the United Nations as a non-governing agency, extending the influence of their congregation so that all may be one. And so their major premise is to serve people, not only in their local community in Westchester County in New York State, but also around the world. These women have been ministering to people who are extremely poor, living on the edges of society in Zambia since 1966. And their ministry then is very, very global. And this is an example, again, of how certain congregations of religious women and men serve other people, not only locally, but globally. But if we look at their worship environment, it's another example where the sisters sit as passive spectators during worship, where the clergy distribute to them, administer to them the sacraments in this particular religious tradition. And so this particular layout of the furnishings, the benches and so forth, does not suggest that all may be one. It suggests that there's some fragmentation in this particular congregation. How can one alter this particular environment for worship so that it says something different, that there is a connectivity amongst the members of the congregation? Women who are have to use wheelchairs and walkers, they have to worship from the balcony upstairs. So the congregation decided to alter this environment for worship. And they placed all of the ritual furnishings in their midst, in the middle of a newly rearranged a seating plan. And so now everybody can worship at this particular table. Everybody can see and hear one another. It's an expression of their connectivity, not only with themselves, but it is also a wonderful expression of their connectivity with people who are vulnerable in other cultures. So the women now who are confined, who are aging, who have to use wheelchairs and walkers and other assistants, they are now all worshiping together with their sisters and their guests on the same floor level. A fine example of the connectivity that this community shares with the rest of the global population. And then a final example, it's the Broadway Presbyterian Church, right on Broadway at the corner of 114th Street in New York City. This particular Presbyterian congregation is out there. They are known in that particular neighborhood, the Upper West Side, and in the Columbia University area for serving those who live on the streets, for those who have no food, for those who are vulnerable. This particular congregation is also very much in the forefront of supporting the LGBTQIA plus communities. Daily, they provide housing, overnight shelters for people who living on the streets. They also provide showers. But the most important thing is that they are served a hot meal during the week, throughout the week. And this is an important ministry in this particular congregation, to even grow their own food on their rooftop to provide at least some organic food for their guests. The pastor there, Chris Shelton, he himself makes it known popularly that we are in the business of sharing, breaking bread with all people. But once again, their worship environment doesn't say that. The worship environment is very clerical oriented with all of the ritual furnishings in the chancel area. And once again, like in some other examples, the pews are fixed to the floor, all facing the area where the worship is administered to them. So once again, they decided in a very, very inexpensive way to unscrew the pews and rearrange them in a circle. So once again, the congregation, when it gathers for worship, they sit in the circle and they can see one another. And there's this sense of connectivity. There's this sense of inclusion. There is diversity, of course, and there is this sense of equity. But on top of all that, whoever comes to worship here then feels like they belong there, that they're not strangers, that they're welcome. Oftentimes, that same sanctuary setting is set aside for serving these guests at a very special meal at special times of the year. So this is another example of how worship environments can be reshaped to celebrate diversity, equity, and inclusion and provide a sense of belonging for those who are vulnerable. Once again, I believe where we pray can shape our prayer, and how we pray energizes the way in which we serve others in the community. Michael?
Dick, thank you so much. That is a really wonderful presentation. Several things occurred to me while you were speaking, and I just wanted to. You can, if you want, you can stop sharing your screen, your PowerPoint there.
I
Uh,
never know that. There we go.
there we go. Perfect. Um, Basically, I wanted to follow up with a couple of questions, which is um, you and I have had several conversations about this word sacred, and specifically the term sacred space. And this whole webinar is basically about inclusion in sacred space. That's sort of the overarching theme over the four presentations. And of course, it's being presented by an organization called Sharing Sacred Spaces. And I wondered if we could talk a little bit about what uh, alternatives we might have to the term sacred space. And I would also just like to hear a little bit more about um, your uh, your your not resistance, but your why the term sacred space may not work uh, for us.
Well, yes, you and I have had these conversations an awful lot. And as you know, I once regarded myself as a sacred space consultant.
Mm.
But I also ponder the meaning of the word sacred. And I think at first glance, I believe it is an overused adjective. And I sometimes think that when we overuse a word, I'm sorry?
Yeah, keep going.
Sometimes when we overuse a word, um, that it loses its meaning. Lately, I've been referring to sacred spaces as holy places. And I think it's probably the same sort of understanding. The word sacred, as we know in the dictionary, says it's a place, it's a time that is set aside for experiencing, in my opinion, those things that are beyond our comprehension. And Suzanne Langer wrote about this a long time ago. There are such things as sacred spaces, not because we've defined them as such, but because we experience them as such. It could be a beach, could be a mountaintop, could be a stream. It could be a bedroom where people make love. It could be a lot of things. It could be taking your children to school and so forth and so on. I think today that the question of sacred space is still a good one, but I also think we have to temper it a little bit to give it further definition, I guess, because just by assigning the adjective to a building doesn't make it, in my opinion, sacred. I argued this for a long time with some world-class architects that I've had the chance to work with. I'll say the Cathedral of Our Lady of the Angels, a 3,000 seat building there, and everybody was calling it a brand new sacred space in Los Angeles. And I said, this building is not a sacred space because the architect designed it. This building will become a sacred space as soon as people are married there, buried there, fall in love there, experience God there, and staff their soup kitchens and their food pantries and reach out to the poor and the vulnerable. Then that space, in my opinion, becomes sacred. So I guess I'm, all alone in this. I'm not suggesting we stop using the adjective sacred, but I do think we have to understand it in new and more exciting ways. Sacred, not in a passive kind of a way, as if we have no control over that space, but in a way that it energizes us to carry out our mission, whatever that may be, depending on our faith tradition.
Um, well, Dick, I want to thank you for spending some time with us and talking about inclusion in sacred space and the whole idea of tearing down the walls, rearranging the pews. And to 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 end up, I just wanted to say that one thing you mentioned the last time we were speaking together was the idea to deliver a little bit of heaven into this earth and not have to wait until later on to have it here and now. And I think the way you're describing inclusion and moving beyond the walls of the sacred building is a way of delivering a little bit of heaven down here.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you all for being with us tonight. And I want to thank Dick again for taking time out of his busy schedule and uh, sharing a very, very full lifetime of experience.
Thank you very much for having me. You're welcome.
Take care. Good night, everyone. Bye bye.